I want to talk to you today about what school-based concerns actually mean clinically and what to do with them. Because there is a gap between what teachers observe and what is medically and developmentally relevant. And that gap can cost children years of support they needed sooner. Teachers are not clinicians. They are not trained to diagnose, but they are trained to observe children in structured environments for 6 hours a day. And the patterns they notice often contain real clinical signal. The problem is that signal gets lost in translation, translated as a behavior problem, a discipline issue, an attitude. And the child who needed a different kind of support ends up managing it alone for another year, and then another one. Let me walk you through the most common things I hear from parents who come in after a school concern has finally tipped them toward an assessment. The first is attention and follow through. The child loses track mid-task, doesn't finish what they started, needs instructions repeated, seems to be listening and then clearly wasn't. The teacher frames it as not paying attention, which is accurate, but the clinical question is why. There is a significant difference between a child who could pay attention and chose not to, and the child whose attention system is dysregulated in a way that makes sustained focus genuinely difficult without support. The second thing I hear about is impulse control, calling out answers before they are called on. Physical impulsivity, bumping into things, touching things, moving when movement isn't appropriate. Social impulsivity, saying the thing that should have stayed unsaid, grabbing a toy, interrupting. These behaviors look like deliberate misbehavior in a classroom. They are often the external face of an executive system that isn't yet providing the pause between stimulus and response that other children the same age have. That is a developmental and neurological question, not a discipline question. The child is not choosing to disrupt the class. The child's brain is not yet giving them the break. The third is emotional dysregulation, and this is the one that most reliably breaks my heart when I hear about it, because this is often the child who is getting consequences for something they couldn't actually control. Crying when they lose a game, meltdowns that seem disproportionate to what happened, shutting down completely when they make a mistake, rage that comes out of nowhere and ends just as fast. What looks like a temper in a classroom is sometimes a nervous system that has been overwhelmed past the point of self-management. And the child in that state needs co-regulation, not punishment. I want to name something for the parents of girls specifically. The child I just described, the one getting emails, the one with visible dysregulation, the one the teacher is worried about. That is often how ADHD and neurodevelopmental differences present in boys and in children with high external expression. Many girls look completely different. They sit quietly, they don't disrupt the class, they follow the rules at enormous personal cost. They come home and fall apart because they have spent 6 hours holding it together. These children don't get emails home. They get described as quiet or a little anxious or needs to speak up more. And they're often waiting much longer for support that they need just as urgently. As a nurse practitioner, I assess children and adolescents across the full neurodevelopmental picture: ADHD, autism spectrum, learning differences, anxiety, developmental coordination, and I can do this from a young age. I work with children as young as 2 and 3 through adolescence and into adulthood, which matters because the picture changes across development and the support needs to be calibrated accordingly. What I am doing in an assessment is not trying to put a label on a child. I am trying to understand how their brain works so the adults in their life can actually support them effectively. And I want to say something directly to the parent who has had a gut feeling for a while. The parent has been watching their child struggle and wondering, and maybe being told by people around them not to worry. They will grow out of it. Your instinct deserves to be taken seriously. You know your child. You have been observing them longer and more closely than anyone. If something feels off, even if you can't articulate exactly what, that is worth exploring. An assessment doesn't tell you what's wrong with your child. It tells you what they need. If your child is receiving school-based concerns, or if you have been observing patterns at home that don't quite fit the picture of a child who is simply having a rough patch, I want you to know that clarity is possible, not because there is something wrong with your child, but because understanding how they are wired changes everything about how you can support them. If you are in Ottawa, Toronto, or anywhere in Ontario, visit child.crocuscare.ca to learn about pediatric and adolescent neurodevelopmental assessment at Crocus Care. That's child.crocuscare.ca. This is educational content, not clinical advice for your specific child. But if you have been sitting on a concern, this might be the right time to take the next step. I'll see you in the next one.